Hi everyone, I'm Janet O'Malley. I am a Quest product marketing manager focused on migration and want to welcome you to our tech talk today, migrating tenant to tenant with native tools with our presenter Mike Weaver today. Sure to be a great presentation, but before we go to that, a couple quick things. It's being recorded. You probably just heard Katie mention that she was hitting record, and that's just so that we can put it on quest.com and have it available for you if you want to listen to it again or any of your colleagues. Please use the chat for any questions you might have. We have two migration experts in the chat, Steve Texera, and who you can see right there waving to you. That's not really what he looks like, but Steve Texera and Fouad Hamdi. And they are experts in this. So you can feel free to try to stump them, keep them busy. We don't want them to get bored in the chat. So keep that in mind if anything comes up. And it'll address questions throughout the presentation, but we can also keep some for Mike at the end if you have something on what Mike is saying. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Janet.
Sure.
So welcome to the session today on migrating tenant to tenant with native tools. So we're going to talk about what's available, what's not available, and the challenges that we have. Whenever I do a session like this, I go back to 2017, back in Ignite in Atlanta, when we got the first announcement for the first tenant to tenant tooling. And I remember very clearly because it was our first launch of a native tool, they're a third-party tool we're working on, and we all got very nervous. And then unfortunately, we didn't see it for several years after. And that is the first cross-tenant mailbox migration, which we now do have in production that I'll be talking about today. So this has been a long journey. M&A is a constant part of our business lives. Needing to do tenant consolidation certainly, continues to increase, and it's something that I know personally I've done a lot of work on, and the migration experts in the chat are here to help as well. So let's dive in on what you can do with the native tools, what's going on with the native tools, and where we still have some growth to happen. This is going to be the agenda today. We're going to go over the data types when we talk about a data migration in Microsoft 365. We're going to go over the options, the tooling for Microsoft Teams, identity, and just practical advice from using these tools and feedback that I've heard from other experts in the space. And obviously Q&A at the end, but please use the chat as we go. I'll try to catch them as I can, or the other people in the chat will, or we can try to go into it if it's timely and I catch it before we go on to the next session. So when we talk about native tools, we first start with Exchange. The first native cross-tenant email migration went GA in 2022. That was, only very recent. Like I said, it was in preview for quite some time. It's very similar to the on-prem cross-forest migrations that came out as early as Exchange 2007. I think 2010 was when it really started to get more mature. But these were the first really cross-forest migration for M&A for on-prem, where you could connect the servers and actually be able to do the migration across forests. The prepare, move, recast PowerShell template script lives on. For those that are used to that, for preparing your objects, you run it on your target objects to copy over the required attributes. That is back and better than ever, I suppose, and certainly part of the migration for this. Some limitations to this native tool from Microsoft is, and this is where this really does kind of hold people up. There's no support for legal hold. So if a user's mailbox is on legal hold and you attempt to move that mailbox, it will be blocked. And the only way around that is to remove the hold. But obviously, to do that and still be compliant, you have to have some sort of method of preserving that data. So a lot of people that are attempting to use this tool that have only a couple mailboxes, they're doing a full compliance search or export of that mailbox and everything that's in scope for that hold, doing the migration, then putting it back on hold on the other side, and running preservation and certainly documenting that plan for the courts should it ever be questioned. The limitation, so the limitation is 2,000 users per batch. see the guidance for migrations over 50,000 mailboxes. This used to be 10,000. It used to be actually the recommendation was a 10,000 mailbox limit. That's recently been changed to email us if you've got more than 50,000 accounts, and that's in the link of the documentation there. The one I don't want to say surprise, but major kind of frustration with this is these are license required, migration license required, and it's not if you have an E5, it's included. Every level does need a particular data migration license, and that's been a bit of a surprise. And I'll talk about more some of the limitations there. That same license includes OneDrive. We'll cover that as well in a minute. So the first steps, you do need to buy your licenses, and that is something that is limited only to direct. Yep, and there's a link for that. And there's a question on the cost of the license. It's not public, or I haven't seen any documentation, but rumors in the industry is it's somewhere between $12 and $15 a user, a mailbox, and that includes OneDrive as well for the migration. It does not include the SharePoint license that's in preview. To go ahead and do the piece, you have to create the app registration in the target, create the migration endpoint in the target, accept the relationship request, and then run those preparation scripts that are required to prepare the users, and then create your migration batches in under 2,000. I will admit the one thing that's really nice about the native tooling now is it's very well documented. For those that did cross-forest migration for the on-prem days, it was really a lot of trial and error and frustration. And in this case, part of it is because the environments are, Office 365, Microsoft 365 is consistent. There's not as much guessing on how to do that setup. So the wizards all work in general, and you really don't hit too many issues in doing the initial setup. And certainly this has been ironed out quite well. OneDrive. The native migration for OneDrive for Business went GA in 2023. This was, I believe, in early 2023, if I remember correctly. And it's OneDrive for Business only. So what I mean by that, it's not the personal, live version. The personal OneDrive for home use is not part of this. The best feature in this, in my opinion, is the share link redirection. This means that if somebody has a share link to your OneDrive and you migrate that account, there's a redirect left behind in that tenant to move to redirect the person over. And if you do things right, it'll actually bring the share permissions over as well, which is just really, really great. You just have to ensure you get that correct. So many people post complaining that it didn't work, but you do have to ensure that you follow that process correctly. And doing the permission mapping as I have on the next bullet point here. Limitations, again, there's a limit. You can't do users that are on legal hold. You have to do a collection. You have to move over. Thank you, Katie, for putting the link right in the chat there to make that helpful. There's also a file path limit, and I believe it's 400 characters, if I remember from memory. And I remember that being, when you're doing your preparation, you just don't think you're going to hit that. But as users use longer and longer names for documents, or really long folder structures, particularly if you had somebody that was a filer and had an extensive file structure, the limit does get hit, and we do hear people complaining that can add up in certain environments, particularly, as I said, environments that had really, really long filer and file paths. This can add up pretty quick. So just do keep that in mind. The license is required. It's the same license, as I said, and it has to have an EA. You can't just direct buy it. You can't go in and, just suddenly buy this. And when you read this documentation, one of the steps that it'll say is you have to prove the ability to purchase this license. And this can be a real disappointment for, people that don't have EAs, particularly for firms that, use MSPs and other providers. So, do keep this in mind that this is a limitation for this license. And this may knock you right to third-party tools right off the bat if you don't have an EA. Similar steps, you're going to see as you go along, you're going to buy licenses, and then you have to set up the SharePoint Online Trust, which is a new trust that is in the documentation, and the target administrator has to accept that trust request. You're going to create the mapping file that we talked about, ensuring that it's accurate and very accurate, so you don't accidentally do the wrong thing, and then you'll initiate the migration. One thing that's also important for the OneDrive migration is it's one and done. This is not a sync tool. This is not a pre-move everyone the weekend before and then do a catch-up migration, or start the migration on Wednesday to get ahead and things like that. It's one and done. This can be a bit stressful because you have to test it and ensure that you're comfortable with the time frames and learn your maintenance windows and issues like that. So just do keep that in mind and be careful of that. Um, Jamie, on your question on path errors, the file can't move. So unfortunately, when I run into it, hopefully it's just if you do have to go into the file, and if it's deep in a file structure, move it to a top folder or email the user, or rename the file, or, unfortunately abandon the file. So it can be quite frustrating. The limit is in the documentation. I believe it's 400 characters. We can check that when I get a break in between when we go to Q&A. Great. When we go to SharePoint Online, I think I'm having an issue with my slides out of order here. I apologize. We shuffled them, and I think I have a different version here, but we're in good shape, I think. Native tools for SharePoint Online. Keep in mind that this is in private preview. This has been in private preview for some time. This is again a one and done migration. It doesn't keep it in sync. And it does include that really, really important share link redirection, which is just as important as it is for the OneDrive project, right? When you're internally putting all these links in different files and different pieces. Again, permission mapping is very important. There's a limit of 4,000 accounts at a time, and that can be quite limiting right there for those that are doing that. Yep, there we go. And there's a limit of 2 terabytes or 1 million items. Private preview, right at the top, you'll see the warning bar of this. Microsoft, as a reminder, private previews are previews that you have to apply for or be invited to, whereas a public preview you can apply to yourself or just simply use it. So do keep in mind, there's also a lot of restrictions with private preview. The support is very limited. Obviously, if you're a Fortune 50 enterprise and have a technical account team that you're working with, you can reach out and understand what those limits are and how you do that. But do keep in mind, these, if you're doing a production migration and you're not in that, Fortune 50 list, and don't have a really large spend and account team, your support will be, really zero. They'll take in feedback for it, but preview is preview. It's not designed for production work. So just be very careful when you're using preview technology for projects, particularly when you're going to have timelines and commitments that you're going to make to the business. If you have issues, you're really going to be, struggling to defend that. So if you are using this, just ensure that you understand the risks, have a backup plan, and keep that in mind when you're going and doing that project. Because it's in preview, we don't have to buy licenses today if you're in the preview program, but I think we can see the pattern from the others that you're going to have to buy the license, and that hasn't been set, that price hasn't been set. We're kind of seeing a pattern in a lot of the pricing, with the difference between me data and we data. We have the me data license, the user data license over for OneDrive and Exchange. My guess is we'll probably see a license here as well, but that's speculation. There's nothing I'm aware of on that. The same trust that you set up for OneDrive for Business, you set up for SharePoint Online. So if you are doing your migration with OneDrive for Business, you can reuse that trust without having to set it up again, and the mapping file, and then initiate the migration. Again, it's a one and done migration, so you have to be really careful with your maintenance windows, and you have to be careful that you're meeting those expectations. So, but previews are great to join too. So if you're someone who's doing a lot of M&A, and you can get into the preview program, it's always good to test that, provide feedback, and get prepared for it. So native migration tools for Microsoft Teams, there are none. This is a very simple section that will fast forward our experience here. This is a really quite a real challenge that we have. It's just limited. There's a lot of APIs available to extract Microsoft Teams data, and certainly backup providers and backup solutions are using those for backup. There was a time where there's third-party tools that are able to use different APIs and some premium APIs, which are quite controversial in the space because of the extreme expense that's there. But unfortunately, in terms of native tools, there are no options. If the Teams data is important to you, which I'm talking to you on Teams today, for those of us that are in, use Teams as our chat solution and storage solution and collaboration solution, abandoning that data is really not an option. So most firms do find that they have to come back to the third-party community for their Microsoft Teams migration, just because there isn't an option and they can't abandon the data. So, we're hopeful that in time this will change. Backup vendors, you'll see a lot of, active chat from all those providers, also trying to ensure that the restore options come back, and that will also unlock some of these data migration options. At least that's the hope that we have. Some other things, to note that, fall into the space. Obviously, if there's, your identity doesn't move, then, you don't have anything. That's a key part of this. When we talk about identity migration, though, well, a lot of times we're talking about an identity sync, or identity creation and items like that. There is the cross tenant identity sync, and this I really do like, but mainly for day one activities I admit. But this can help drive, we talked about the prepare move script, PowerShell script example for cross-tenant exchange moves. This can help drive that if done correctly. And but this is really helpful more for M&A and more for day one activities. So, the ink is signed on the agreement and you want to go ahead and jump and get everybody in the gal so you get names and emails and be able to do some cross work. This you have to have a P1 license in the home tenant, and this is designed for owned and controlled entities. This isn't I'm creating a partnership. There's federation agreements that you can do to get look up gals and things like that. But this really isn't designed for this really is designed for situations where you just bought a company and want to collaborate and not divest, right? You don't want to, for a divestiture or carve out, you don't want to create that agreement either. This one is really exciting. This is a preview program that came out last year. It's a multi-tenant organization. I think there's been rumors for this for quite some time, but this is the first time we've actually seen it out. This is again designed for owned and controlled entities. This is outlined in the chat here. It's a really nice program, and for M&A, it's really quite inclusive, and it allows you to, tie tenants together and be able to do really an immersive sharing and collaboration. I've got a note here on where the future is in some of these items. Um, when this first came out, a lot of us were kind of thinking, okay, is this going to be the end of doing a tenant-to-tenant migration and the need for doing, data migration at all? Why move it when I can just, put these organizations together and do it? And the reality is that you still have a lot of the same challenges with data management and protecting multiple tenants and some of the challenges that still exist there. So for many firms, even when this is even more mature than it is in the previous state that it is, I'm not sure if this is going to be the final solution for projects. The other thing is right now is there are some limits. There's a 5 tenant limit that's limiting for those that do. I think a lot of firms fall into an M&A. You're either always acquiring or rarely acquiring. So if you got 1 or 2, then maybe this is amazing, but you're going to go through 5 pretty quick. When the preview program was announced, there was a 100,000 user limit. I put a question mark on this because in reviewing all the documents for this session, I don't see that limit anymore. So certainly, if you're over 100,000 users, you're going to have a agreement. It's certainly something to talk to your account team and just be sure that you're going to meet those preview requirements. You have to get into that preview anyway, so you're likely working with that team. I don't know. There's no information on cost. This one may not have costs in the end, just because you're still gonna have to have the licenses and 2 tenants, and it's, kind of glue holding it together. But they may have certain license requirements, or maybe it's only available for E5 and E3. But again, that's speculation. And in the next few slides, I'm going to talk about more speculation on where this market's going, and at least from my personal opinion on where we're seeing native migration going. And the first thing is that pay. When we talk about future, these native tools are not going to be free. Where we see the APIs, the premium APIs, becoming something that you have to pay for. We see licenses, user license for data migration for personal users. So you're going to pay for this one way or another, whether it's going to be a third-party tool or a native tool. And then some of these third-party tools are getting slapped with, data migration bills as well for using some of the premium APIs. So this market really is being there. I think a lot of people have found that the organizations that are consuming a lot of resources are not as big, and they're doing NMA, and they want to do cost recovery for people that are using the service that way. Certainly that makes the service more expensive for everybody, so they're trying to allocate costs back to the right firm. But it is quite frustrating, especially when a lot of us did migrations with Exchange Web Services and these other things that we don't get billed for, to suddenly see all these have a cost associated with it. So if you're doing your budgets for M&A planning, do keep in mind that you need to keep some of these costs in mind. The segmented tools and admin centers are going to continue. This is, as we see, you're going to do your OneDrive migration in this one, and your SharePoint migration in this one, and your Exchange migration in PowerShell, and probably a Teams migration will be another tool. Every single data migration is going to be in a different admin center. This is going to make this more and more a services business. Instead of buying software, you'll have services running them, but it still is a lot of work to set all these up and maintain them and move them. Back when we did M&A for, a lot of on-prem search situations, you had your file server team, your Exchange team, your SharePoint team, and all these different segmented teams in the organization. Now we have the Microsoft 365 team. A lot of these organizations, including your own, we have Microsoft 365 specialists for the whole stack. So running all these different admin centers isn't natural and can be quite frustrating. Whereas a
Hey,
lot of the
Mike.
third-party tools give you additional pieces there.
Yeah, sorry, Mike, to interrupt. We have a question. How these native migration tools stack up against prominent third-party migration tools, such as those offered by Quest?
Cool. So, the Tech Talks were vendor agnostic. Certainly there's a Quest sponsorship here. The native tools, when they come out, if they work and within your limitations, then certainly it's an option for you. I think the major challenge that we have right now is the tool set is still maturing, and some of these limitations that third-party tools like Quest Solutions and some others that are in the market have been able to overcome these for quite some time. So, moving a mailbox on legal hold, something that's sorted. You don't have to deal with that problem, with most of the third-party tools. Whereas, Microsoft, with the Microsoft tooling, that's disabled at this time, or not permitted. So it is, the native migration tools, as I always tell people, and when I sold third-party migration tools in my career, it was always, if the native tools work, you should use them, but they don't really work in a lot of the scenarios right now. And then, you really don't have a choice. But also, too, when we talk about here, a lot of times the native tools just aren't as easy to use. And having all these different admin centers to work in, M&A is stressful. There's a lot of projects going on at the same time. They're emotional. There's a whole leadership series that I wrote with a change management expert on this once, of, the emotional side of managing an IT team through M&A. And that still is today. And we all go through it a lot. So I think sometimes a third-party tool can give a lot of relief to teams as well, because it is all in one place and easy to use. So that gap certainly is getting smaller between them. But where Microsoft is charging for these, it used to be, oh, the native tool is free, so my competition is free. Now the pricing is similar. People, I think you're going to see more and more, particularly outside of the large enterprise space, continue to use third-party tooling just for its ease of use on top of everything else. And I think that, really also, goes to the last point here. Migration software has a lot more life in it for a while. Whenever, as I said at the beginning, to kind of bring things back together, when we talk about, on the stage in Atlanta at Ignite, sharing, the first cross-tenant migration tool in 2017, it's 2024 now, and we're still having these limitations. So we're going to still be using and seeing third-party migration tools really being a key part of our M&A execution for quite some time. Some additional guidance on, if you can use the native tools, can you abandon your Microsoft Teams data? Really, it's, do you have an EA, and can you abandon your Microsoft Teams data? If you have an EA and you can abandon your Teams data, then you can use the native tools. But right there, that discounts a huge amount of the project work. And that's really, when I, take a call from someone, those are the first two questions that I usually ask people when they're starting to figure out how they're going to manage their project for the first time. Do you have litigation holds? Yes. Okay. How many? Can I mitigate it through other means? Or is that going to hold up my whole project? Again, phase 2 of the questioning. AD group migrations. How are you going to handle that? How are you going to, do you need a third party tool to come in and do your, beyond just the identity sync? When we talked about the identity sync program that is in public, that doesn't include AD groups. That doesn't include some of these other groups, particularly if you're in hybrid mode, some of your on-prem AD items that may need to come over to the target. If most of your data is in OneDrive and Exchange and you can do mitigation on your other items, then this may be quite attractive. But if you have an extensive SharePoint environment, which most of us do, you have an extensive Teams environment, which most of us do, again, this puts us right back into native tooling. And the other thing to keep in mind is carve-outs, divestitures. If you're going to another organizations, all these third-party tools require trusts and setup, and they're really not designed to segment. The cross-tenant migration has some limitations that you can put in for the mailbox migrations. That one's probably the better one that you might be able to get away with. But when you start looking at the SharePoint and OneDrive migrations, these are things that you probably don't want to do with a competitor that you have to sell off a state of business to, or someone that you don't want to necessarily have inside your network and do that kind of thing, or where mistakes could be made and be very difficult. So if you're doing a divestiture, these are still either putting it on a hard drive or out on cloud storage, or moving it to a temporary tenant and abandoning that for the other company, which is another method for divesting groups. So just keep that in mind. These are really, if you want to talk about kind of use native tools, these are the questions that I bring out this card every once in a while when I'm preparing for a call. The other challenges that we have here are just also logistics. If you have to pay Microsoft for part of the migration, should you just use a combined solution from a third-party vendor? Once you start adding up all these licenses, it may be cheaper to use a third-party solution. Plus, again, you don't have the Teams or SharePoint migration public today. The other challenge is, the third-party tools, they've got to make enough money to support the product, right? So, many of these solutions across the market are not going to discount out Exchange and OneDrive just because you only want to use them for SharePoint and Teams. It's the same setup overhead. They still have to assign consulting engineers. They still need tech support. They still need setup. They still need, they're overrun as an organization to support you. So do keep in mind when we talk about those I'll use Exchange, use the native tools, and they'll do third party for the rest. You're not going to see a major price difference for most of these firms. The only argument that I've heard in splitting it up, there's some firms that have very sensitive items in their email, and they feel that they don't have it in Teams and some of our others. So they wanted to keep, their Exchange data within the walls of Microsoft. So they wanted to do their email migration using the cross-tenant migration and the others. I think you can probably poke holes in that argument pretty quickly. But some firms, I've run into a couple firms that have made that decision for that. The question, so the Exchange and SharePoint user migration does not apply to hybrid users. The user migration is a bit different. So Exchange, if the mailbox is out in Exchange, you can still do the migration, but it's not going to traverse an on-prem mailbox and bring it up. SharePoint, same thing. It would have to be, for the preview program, would have to be out in Microsoft 365. So with that, we got a healthy amount of time for Q&A here. I don't know if we have any that I missed in the chat, or if anybody has any that they'd like to put in. This would be a great time. Otherwise, we can also see if there's any from the experts on the call here, or anything that they'd like to add from their experience. They're welcome to do so.
Hey, Mike, this is Steve. I just wanted to sort of address that most recent question. So the Exchange and SharePoint users migration does not apply to hybrid users. So you are correct, obviously, from a strictly user standpoint, a hybrid user life cycle, that's an on-prem AD user account migrating typically to a target on-prem hybrid or even an Azure only scenario, which we would handle as well. But in the context of maybe there's a bifurcation of data, maybe there's some SharePoint on-prem and maybe there's some mailboxes on-prem and different hybrid configurations, even to this day with a lot of customers, we have mechanisms that will move the SharePoint on-prem to the cloud, whether it's a divestiture or just your own environment, and we also would handle the on-prem mailbox that are left behind for security purposes or otherwise, and migrate those off to another Office 365 tenant, all seamlessly in the same portal.
Great, that's a great addition, Stephen. Thank you. Yeah, and yeah, very well said. And just to clarify, Stephen is, you're representing the Quest tools on what's in there, not the native tools that are available.
Yeah.
Here. So.
Yeah, correct. There's a Quest disclaimer there. Yeah, obviously. Sorry.
Yep. No worries. Just so there's not confusion.
We have
I'm going to pull up Brian's
about...
question. Yeah, I'm going to pull up the doc for this right now. To Exchange. Brian, can you clarify? Do you mean just Google G Suite, the whole G Suite, or Google Mail? What's your use case there?
Yeah, they're looking at moving primarily Mail and then some of the other pieces that I'm not too familiar with. But yeah, probably gonna be Sites and Google Drive, things like that, into OneDrive and translation of that.
Yep. So I'm just pulling up the documentation, which again, it's amazing how great the doc site has gotten, because I can just find it very quickly. Let's see. Yep. So you can do the mail migration native. There's some documentation out there, but my understanding is the G Suite file migration. Actually, Stephen, if you're still on, you may know this better than I do. The actual G Suite migration into 365. I don't think that native tooling, because it used to be, what was the acquisition that they had? G Suite migration.
You mean
Sorry,
Microsoft specifically?
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on the acquisition that they had a few years ago that allowed them to do data migration in. I'm just going to find it here, right here. OneDrive. And Brian, just to answer kind of your question, most are doing the migration with third-party tools when it comes to Google. Most are not, to my knowledge, are not using the native tools for. Let me put it this way: if I'm having to Google this much to find the answer, it shows you the last time I touched the native tools for G Suite. So I think most are doing that. Like I said, I know the mailbox migrations there. I'm just trying to see if the file migration itself. You know, what you have to keep in mind with a G Suite migration is the structure's different. So in the world of Google, you know, you don't really have the SharePoint concept or the shared folder concept. You have a drive, and that user owns that drive. So it gets a bit complicated because you just have to, you know, transform the data at the same time. So just keep in mind, regardless of what you do, that's going to become a bit of a more complicated piece where some of the native tools will help analyze the permissions and help identify and sort where they go. So unfortunately, that I can dive in post. We can do a post chat if we need to on that a bit more. But the mail yes files a bit more problematic.
Apparently they can. I mean, research to confirm, but it's just mail, rules, calendar, contact, and that's what they call G Suite workspace, which is fairly limited to mail realm, really.
Yeah, I think there's
Yeah,
a
it's a whole
mover.
different
There we
structure,
go.
you know?
I remember it. Mover. The that had some support for it, which I think may still be out there. But the but again, this also goes to technology isn't really fully the problem. It's a mismatch in how people use the solutions, and that'll get you. It's almost like a Slack migration to Teams. It's a nightmare. So just keep in mind that's going to be one of your larger challenges.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you. That's what it was looking like on System Discovery. So I was like, didn't know if there's anything else. Yeah, because we're just looking at third parties for doing it.
Yep. So, you know, get them you're ready for it, and yeah, post we can go into a chat offline sometime if you like.
Yeah, I'll put in the chat what I found on the Microsoft website for the G Suite, but yeah.
Perfect. Yes, thank you, Jose. It's a changing world, so we all got to work together. That's why I love these Tech Talk series, because they're we host them in a meeting like this where we all can collaborate at the end here. Great. If that's slowing down, Janet, it might be time to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, sure. Sure, I can come back over. So thank you all for joining our Tech Talk today. Hope you found that helpful to the work you do. And just a PSA I wanted to put in here. If you liked the content, you want more like this, throughout Mike's presentation, you probably heard him mentioning the Atlanta Tech event. So there is an in-person tech event every year. The next one is going to be in Dallas, Texas, October 1st and 2nd. Just a great opportunity to get access to experts, to MVPs or Microsoft employees there, network with your peers, talk about technology, what's out there, you know, kind of what Mike did today, but maybe on steroids, a whole lot more of that and a lot of different topics.
We'd actually do the G Suite migration.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and drop the link for registration in the chat if you're interested in that. And if not, and no more questions are coming in, then thank you for your time. Really appreciate your joining us today and learning with us. And Mike, thank you for your time and sharing your knowledge. Great job. So that's it. That's a wrap. Thanks, guys.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye now.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.